think a lot of people haven't heard of you yet. Part of it, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And I think a lot of people may have started hearing some rumblings about this Andrew Yang person. You're running on Medicare for all, universal basic income. That would mean every American would receive a monthly stipend, and something you're calling human-centered capitalism. What does that phrase mean?
Yeah, so I like to talk about my wife, who's right now, I literally got off the phone with her FaceTime, where she's at home with our 2 young boys, one of whom is autistic. And her work counts as 0 in GDP, which is clearly not an appropriate reflection of the value. And so GDP right now is leading us off a cliff, where we're cheerleading this measurement that we made up almost 100 years ago. And so one of the things I ask people is, how many of you were excited about GDP when you woke up in the morning? How many of you were like, I'm going to make a big contribution today? And so what we have to do is we have to update our measurements to things that would actually reflect how we're doing. So things like mental health and freedom from substance abuse, health and life expectancy, clean air and clean water. That if you have the wrong measurements, you can't make progress. And right now, GDP is going to keep hitting record highs, even as our life expectancy shortens and more Americans get left behind. So human-centered capitalism is about updating our measurements to actually reflect how we are doing.
So, in practice, so you're elevating these other measures of what makes a society healthy, right? But in practice, you're talking about a better social safety net. You're doing it through UBI and Medicare for all. You're talking about better regulations of corporations and protecting people from corporate abuses, both as workers and as consumers. When you put aside the terms, how does that differ from the version of capitalism that, say, Elizabeth Warren advocates for, one with a much more strict regulatory regime to protect workers and consumers, and a much stronger social safety net, which might include Medicare for all? What's the actual policy difference between like the more mainstream liberal Democratic candidates?
I'm a big fan of Elizabeth Warren's. I think many of the Democratic candidates for president have very aligned and similar visions. We just have slightly different points of emphasis as to how we get there. So I think an America with Elizabeth Warren as president would be vastly better. And I think that we just have slightly different paths to get there. But I have many friends who are working with Elizabeth Warren right now. So I mean, to me, part of it is that there is one thing that I think Democrats tend to get a little bit too emphatic about, which is sort of like trying to curb the harm. And so to me, it'd be even better to start trying to figure out what the good is and then direct more of our energies towards it instead of always trying to curb the abuses. I mean, curbing the abuses is definitely needed and something we need to do. But we also need to keep our eyes on the prize about how to improve our own lives.
Let's talk about memes for a second. You developed a big online following.
Yang Gang. Any Yang Gangers out there? A few. Don't worry, we'll get the rest of you soon.
Yang Gang at the Wang. But this following, you've drawn attention, even some support from some of the darkest and most hate-filled parts of the internet, including alt-right Trump country. There was one image that I thought captured at least part of this sentiment. Can we put up this meme? Do you believe that this is a real phenomenon, and what do you make of it, right? Like, what do you make of this, of your relationship to this part of the kind of worst part of the internet?
Well, one of the themes of my campaign is we have to solve the problems that got Donald Trump elected. And one of the main things that got Donald Trump elected is this economic dislocation around the country that is not being driven by immigrants. Furthest thing from it, it's being driven by technology and the fact that more Americans' labor is getting minimized in value. And so I've already completely disavowed any support from anyone who has any kind of hateful or racist ideology. And I myself, I'm the son of immigrants. I mean, one of the things, it's like, do I look like a white nationalist? It's been kind of a point of confusion. But I think that my campaign is drawing in people from different ideologies because they can tell that I'm just trying to solve the problems on the ground and improve Americans' lives.
All right, let's talk about universal basic income. And I think this is, for a lot of people, something new that they're learning about. So just to let people kind of know what the policy is, every American adult would get $1,000 a month, no strings attached, paid for by adding a value-added tax, which businesses would pay. And it seems like you offer kind of two rationales. One is that there's automation and technology that's going to eliminate a lot of jobs. And the other is just the benefits that you see of a universal basic income, that it will help people pay for things. It will make it easier for people to negotiate for their own jobs because they don't no longer feel like they can be exploited, that it'll improve the economy, it'll give people the ability to find a new job, that kind of thing. But these to me seem to be in tension because one is based around the jobs that will go away, and the other is about how people can improve their own lives, find work, and find careers that are fulfilling. Is part of your belief in universal basic income that you believe that there won't be new jobs to replace the jobs that automation makes go away?
Yeah, so we're in the third inning of the greatest economic and technological transformation in the history of the country. It's being called the fourth industrial revolution, and here in Boston, folks at MIT have been saying, look, this is going to be 2 to 3 times more dramatic than the industrial revolution at the turn of the century. There are going to be many new jobs that get created with artificial intelligence and robotics and new software, but those jobs will tend to be for different people in different places with different skill sets than the folks that are being displaced. And unfortunately, the dynamism between those two environments and contexts has been going down, not up. So a universal basic income would help strengthen Americans' ability to make that transition. But as you say, there's this very compelling social rationale for it as well. And one thing I like to say is that the Democratic Party wants to be the party of empowering women, which we should be. But right now, there are millions of American women that are in abusive and exploitative jobs and relationships that would be improved by getting $1,000 a month.
But I want to stay on the issue of, like, will automation mean to you that there will be huge numbers of Americans who get this basic income because they will not work again? Is that part of it? Is part of your rationale for this that in the future there will be more Americans that don't work, that will not have jobs because there simply will not be jobs to replace the ones we've lost?
Well, so a couple of things. If you can imagine an economy where all of you were getting $1,000 a month, just think about where that money would go. That money would go to tutoring services and car repairs you've been putting off, and the occasional night out, and like some hardware store. And all of those businesses might then need to hire another person or two to meet the increased demand. We'd create over 2 million new jobs based upon putting this consumer buying power into people's hands. But if you look at what's happening right now in our economy, we're in year 10 of an expansion, and our labor force participation rate is already down to 63%, a multi-decade low, in the same levels as Ecuador and Costa Rica. And this is year 10 of an expansion. Our life expectancy has declined for the last 3 years because of surges in suicide and drug overdoses that has actually gone hand in hand with people finding no spot in the workforce. So when you say, do I project a future where people aren't going to have jobs, I don't need to project a future because it's in the data right now. And we need to think much bigger about how we can help Americans move forward and create those jobs that they can actually access in their communities.
Let's talk about the labor force participation. So you're right. So right now we're at 63%. At the worst part of the Great Recession, I think it dropped to 60%, right? The peak is, say, 1990s, around 67%, right? So what we have is roughly 1954 to now, the participation rate of men dropped from 98% to 88%, right? And women came into the workforce. It peaks in 1990, and then the recession happens and it flattens. And yet, labor force participation rate in around 1954 is around 60-something%. Today, it's around 63%. Men, still 88% are in the labor force, a drop that is not precipitous based on technological change now. It's a change that's been happening literally since 1954. Can you look at that data and say, you know what, actually, we've replaced jobs that have been lost to automation, that automation won't actually end up, that this is once again the kind of prediction we've heard before, that automation, like the Industrial Revolution, was going to make certain jobs obsolete and there wouldn't be ones to replace them. And yet, would this, in your mind, is this the first time that truism hasn't worked out, that this is the first time ever that new jobs didn't come to replace the old ones?
Yeah, so I wrote a book on this topic that sussed out the data around what happened to the manufacturing workers in the Midwest. And I studied economics at Brown University. Any Brown alums in the room? Yeah.
Do you want to compliment me on the fucking data I pulled out of my goddamn head?
Yeah, no, it was really impressive. You just like had a graph. I was, I should say. So if you look at what happened to the 4 million manufacturing workers that lost their jobs, almost half of them left the workforce and didn't work again. And then of that group, about half filed for disability. So this was the and this went hand in hand with the decline in the labor force participation rate from 2000 to 2015. So that has been, to me, the single biggest sign that this time really is different, that our labor force is not realigning in the way that we would hope it would.
Okay. I'm out of data. So I want to talk about the politics of UBI, and I want to focus on this because this is what you made central to your campaign. I think it's something that is interesting and important because it's a new debate that we're having. So right now we see political fights, and they're not about passing universal basic income, right? There's a fight about a work requirement for Medicaid. When AOC and Merkley announced the Green New Deal, a single poorly worded talking point about a benefit for those on, what'd I say? Did I say Merkley instead of Markey? And I'm in Massachusetts. I said Merkley, but I meant Markey. And we're in Massachusetts, and he's from here. When AOC and Markey announced the Green New Deal, if you laugh, I can't make myself look smarter in the edit.
He's going to edit that out.
Now I'm going to leave it in. It's all part of the show. All right. Anyway, to my point, you Boston animals, okay. I can't take these people anywhere. A single talking point about people being unwilling to work became central to the Republican critiques of it. You know, we also just beat back a privatization effort on Social Security, seems to resurface every few years. I looked up the HHS description of TANF, right? This is a program that provides a small amount of financial support for women who are pregnant in need. It provides help for food and rent and utilities, right? It's to make sure that women, when they're pregnant and in need, that they can provide for their children and provide for their families. This is what the HHS website currently lists for the purposes of TANF. It says, provide assistance to needy families so that children can be cared for in their own homes. It then adds, reduce the dependency of needy parents by promoting job preparation, work and marriage, prevent and reduce the incidence of out-of-wedlock pregnancies. It goes on from there. And the reason I bring it up is universal basic income is this huge, big idea that will provide a benefit to everyone, right? Rich and poor, people who are working, people who aren't working. And yet the fights we're having right now in politics seem to be so difficult and so rooted in this idea of dependency and earning things that even a program for helping needy pregnant women to get through our political system has required this language about dependency. How do you square this vision for something as big as UBI with the amount of struggle and fight it's taken over 50 years to build this patchwork of benefits we have now?
I couldn't agree more with the examples you cite where people are being forced to defend benefits that by any standard we should just look at and say, of course, that these expectant mothers should be getting these benefits. Of course, that these children should have more support. And that's one reason why I'm so passionate about the freedom dividend, which is what I've rebranded universal basic income, is that it helps change the battleground to something that becomes much more universally appealing, because instead of it being presented as something that someone else in some situation gets, which unfortunately Americans right now seem to lack the compassion and empathy to see that as something that we should be championing. If you say, look, everyone gets this, then all of a sudden people ease up and be like, oh, I'm everyone. You know, like I qualify. And so this no longer becomes like an us versus them fight. It becomes a universal right of citizenship in the richest and most advanced economy in the history of the world. And so what I start pointing people to is like, look, it might seem far out, but Thomas Paine was for this at the founding of the country. Martin Luther King was for this in 1967. Milton Friedman and 1,000 economists signed a study saying this would be tremendous for the country. And one state has had a dividend for almost 40 years where everyone in that state gets between $1,000 and $2,000 a year, no questions asked. And what state is that? And how do they fund it? And what is the oil of the 21st century? Technology, that's right. And so what
hold on a second. What kind of fucking Yang Gang plants do we got out there? You didn't applaud when he asked it. He was like, oh, I guess there's no Yang Gang members here. What is this? You have rigged casino games? What are you, tapping each other messages? Sorry.
No. So I love the Alaska example because Alaska is a deep red conservative state. And they've had this dividend and is wildly popular, has created thousands of jobs, has improved children's health, has decreased income inequality, and has stood the test of time. And Alaskans like their dividends so much that a majority said they would accept higher taxes to fund the dividend. It's the reverse of all of the fights we're having over benefits to mothers and children. And so if you make it universal, then you make it something that everyone can get excited about.
So, you know, there were two things. You have a very large number of very specific policy proposals, some big, some related to, say, MMA fighters, and, you know, you run the gamut on that website. But there was two policies that I wanted to talk about with you. You called for a local news fund and a national news ombudsman at the FCC. And to me, these are ideas that strike me as interesting, and then you think about what happens when an idea like that meets our political system, meets the realities of partisan politics, and you start to worry, well, I don't want the federal government getting involved in local journalism and making those decisions, and I certainly don't want the FCC deciding what's true and what's false. When I see an idea like that, I think, oh, this is somebody from tech, this is somebody from business, not somebody from politics. What do you say to those that are concerned that, yeah, you have these big ideas, but you've never been in politics before, and calling for something as big as UBI, calling for proposals like this, it reveals that, you know, you've not been in the political trenches and therefore don't know how to move things through Congress, move things through the bureaucracy if you were to become president?
Yeah, it's a fair question. So first I just want to address the local journalism piece because I think it's really important. If you're going to have a functioning democracy, you need journalism. And over 1,200 newspapers have gone out of business in communities around the country. And it's been shown that if you don't have a local paper, then your voting becomes more polarized and people have lower information. So as a country, are we just going to say, well, local newspapers, their time is done because the market doesn't support them anymore? Or do you say if you believe in democracy, then you have to actually support local journalism? So my plan is just to have a matching set of grant funds to initiate public-private partnerships, in many cases cooperative business models or nonprofit business models, because a lot of these communities can have a local paper, it's just not going to become a huge moneymaker. Yes. So this is like the vision is to put public resource to work, but of course the federal government is not going to decide what the heck is going on in that paper. It's just going to come and say, hey, what's that? You have a proposal? Like, here's some money to help you make the transition. In terms of me and Washington, D.C. and getting things done, I spent the last 7 years running a national nonprofit that I started. And anyone, raise your hand if you've worked in nonprofits or yeah, so if you have, then you know that the way you get things done is by consensus and having a vision that other people get behind. You have hundreds of stakeholders. I am the opposite of the guy who will say, I'm going to run government like a business, because anyone who says that is dumb. They're just completely different things with like different leadership models and different, completely different skills required. But in addition to running a business that was acquired, like I started and ran a multi-million-dollar nonprofit that was extraordinarily human. And I think getting things done is going to require the same sort of galvanizing people around a shared vision that would help move this country forward.
What do you think of Howard Schultz?
Man, I have a rule not to say not nice things about people. But I've been around Howard, and let's just say his force field is strong.
Okay. I'll take it.